Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries. In August 1865, Captain Thomas Musgrave stepped into a rotting, abandoned gatehouse on a freezing sub-Antarctic island. Inside, he found a mummified corpse lying on a makeshift bed, its hands folded neatly across its chest. Beside it was a slate covered in frantic, illegible scratches. Musgrave was stunned. He and his four-man crew had just spent 18 grueling months shipwrecked on this exact island, entirely convinced they were the only humans for hundreds of miles. They were trapped on the Auckland Islands, a jagged ring of wind-scoured basalt nearly 300 miles south of New Zealand. Sailors called it the cemetery of the Pacific, a place of horizontal sleet where cliffs drop sheer into freezing black water. But Musgrave wasn't alone. In 1864, two different ships wrecked on opposite ends of this wasteland. One group erased their ranks and built a thriving democratic republic. The other clung to their social hierarchy, collapsed into paranoia, and ultimately turned to cannibalism. To understand why one group thrived while the man with the slate died alone in the dark, we have to look at the 20 miles of rock that separated them. In January 1864, the 56-ton schooner Grafton was driven onto the island's southern rocks. As the hull fractured in the surf, Captain Musgrave kept his crew calm on the tilted deck through the freezing night. At dawn, they systematically salvaged food, canvas, and iron from the wreckage. 4 months later, at the northern end of the island, the massive 900-ton Invercauld struck a reef. Their captain shouted contradictory orders into the dark. Panic took over. The crew failed to launch lifeboats, and 6 men drowned immediately in the churning surf. The 19 Invercauld survivors washed ashore with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Their only hope of making a fire lay in a single box of soggy matches. But in their frantic desperation to dry them, a crewman held them too close to a spark. They ignited in a flash, destroying their only reliable source of heat. The ocean had wrecked both ships. But the trajectory of the next year was set in those first few hours. Musgrave secured a foundation for his men, while the Invercauld's officers secured a death sentence. Down south, the Grafton crew recognized their vulnerability. They formally dissolved their shipboard ranks and wrote a constitution guaranteeing equal shares of food. They taught their illiterate crewmates to read by lamplight and brewed a crude, sour beer from wild roots to ward off scurvy. Working as a unified team, they learned to hunt the massive sea lions patrolling the beaches. They harvested the dark, oily meat for calories, rendered the blubber for lamp fuel, and cured the hides to make boots and a protective door for their cabin. Meanwhile, the Invercauld survivors stumbled into a massive stroke of luck. Pushing inland, they found the remains of Hardwick, an abandoned British colonial settlement. It offered wooden structures, valuable scrap iron, and remnants of planted gardens. But they couldn't capitalize on it. The captain and his mates strictly enforced Victorian class divisions. The officers sheltered in the rotting buildings and issued orders, forcing teenage ship apprentices to forage in the freezing rain until the boys collapsed and died of exhaustion. Having access to pre-existing shelter and tools gave the Invercauld crew a massive physical advantage, but their toxic, unequal social structure rendered every bit of it useless. As winter deepened and starvation set in, the Invercauld crew began to fracture. The boatswain openly proposed drawing lots to see which crewmate they should murder and eat. The lowest-ranking seaman, Robert Holding, refused to participate, realizing the officers would likely rig the vote against him. The tension soon boiled over into violence. A weakened German sailor named Fritz was shoved out of a shared shelter into the freezing night. He died where he fell. Days later, Holding discovered another crewmate huddled over Fritz's frozen body, actively consuming his flesh. The ultimate betrayal came shortly after. James Mahoney, the ship's second mate, had a severe foot injury and could no longer forage. The remaining officers declared him dead weight. They packed up and willingly left him behind in the ruins to starve. The Invercauld survivors were dying long before they ran out of food. By treating their own as disposable burdens, They dismantled the only social structure that could have kept them alive. 18 months after their wreck, the Grafton crew decided to save themselves. They built a bellows from sealskin, forged their own tools from scrap iron, and modified their tiny 12-foot dinghy. 3 of the men sailed it across 300 miles of lethal open ocean to reach New Zealand and summon a rescue for the rest. The 3 surviving Invercauld men, the captain, the first mate, and the seaman Robert Holding, escaped by pure chance. A leaking Portuguese ship seeking emergency repairs happened to drop anchor in their bay and took them aboard. The rescue offered a sickening final irony. Aboard the Portuguese ship, the Invercauld's captain and mate were given comfortable officers' cabins. Robert Holding, the lowly seaman who actually foraged and kept them alive, was banished to sleep in the ship's crowded slums. Which brings us back to the decaying hut and the mummified corpse. The man Musgrave found was James Mahoney, the injured mate abandoned by the Invercauld officers. His illegible slate was a final, desperate message scratched out as he slowly starved to death alone. During his search of the island, Musgrave realized his crew had actually seen a faint plume of smoke rising in the distance months earlier, but the dense, impassable forest and sheer cliffs made it impossible to investigate. If the Invercauld crew had managed to stay united, or attempted to navigate the coast instead of turning on each other, they would have found the Grafton cabin just 20 miles away, complete with a forge, warm beds, and a crew willing to help. In 1864, 2 crews faced the same environment, the same weather, and the same isolation. One group built a house, the other built a graveyard. Ultimately, the difference between life and death on Auckland Island was the decision to stop acting like individuals and start acting like a society,